and then I would change my mood or something, and I would, I don't give a crap, I don't talk about this anymore. And then something would happen, and it would come up again, and part of it is, I've learned now, not to get off the subject, but you stow it. You package it up, compartmentalize it, and you put it away, and you move on with your life. And then somebody like Randy or this gal in Pennsylvania calls you up, or Charles, or whoever, and then it comes up again.
Right.
And you go back there, and there was a period of time when I was younger that it wasn't super comfortable, and then there was sort of a middle period where all I really wanted to do was process it and talk about it with people that were interested in listening to it. And of course my wife is sick and tired of it. Doesn't want to hear any more about it.
Yeah.
And then now it's getting to the point where I'm getting close to being done, and I can't remember stuff, and that's and then you end up going back to that sort of trauma and grief, which I think I processed enough of it. So this may be the last interview I ever do about this.
Yeah.
And I don't. It doesn't have to happen in one sitting or whatnot. You know, if you.
Sure.
But
Well,
so this is what I realized after reading Charles's book that and I just read the part that I was involved in. I never bothered with the rest of it because I was kind of put off initially because there were things that my wife read it and she said, "You didn't say that," and she was sitting right there.
right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
then I became a little more careful about what, I mean, that was a learning experience, and I understand Charles needs to be published. And I mean, it's his job. It's how he makes a living, how he feeds his family. And I get that. That was my argument to Kurt, is, you know, we gotta show up on time to these radio interviews. We can't be completely drunk or stoned or whatever. We have to be coherent, you know. It's a business. And that's where he and I were in constant conflict all the time, is because he was just interested in expressing his art, or I later understood that he as a creative, he was basically exercising his demons and vomiting up his pain and his trauma and his issues about his life, and then he would just move on to the very next thing, and that's the way he wrote, and was just, and he had so much grief and anger about his mom and his dad's divorce and the situation his mom was in and all that other stuff.
Sure. Let's pause for just a second, just because I think you are recording, right?
Yeah, I just turned them on.
Okay, so for the record, it's March 18th, 2024,
Okay.
and we're talking with Ryan Egner? Okay.
That's correct.
All right. So that's really interesting what you're talking about, because over the years, part of what I've read from Kurt is that lyrics were always secondary.
Absolutely.
And he said, well, it doesn't mean anything. I almost feel like he was trying to say, don't read too much into the lyrics.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, there's, you know, like what you're saying, it's if he's drawing from his personal experiences,
Well,
it seems very raw, you know,
It was, and this is the thing, it's like, I don't know if you've ever read, like there was a book that came out that was his handwriting
Mhm.
of his journals.
I have. Yeah.
And those, I mean, if there was ever whatever you call that Jack Kerouac style of writing, that's exactly the way Kurt wrote. And I had those different notebooks in my hand, and he would show them to me. He wasn't embarrassed about it at all,
Okay.
and read through them. It was very reflexive. He was just, letting his mind be free and right. At that time, I didn't see it that way. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about William S. Burroughs or Jack Kerouac or any of the beat writers. I mean, Kurt probably was well aware of those sorts of things.
Oh, sure.
But
I understand he spent a good amount of time at the library and.
well, that's all he had to do.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. People come up and ask me, like, oh, he was so gifted. Yeah, that one thing. If anybody did one thing, not bathe, not brush his teeth, not eat, not dress, not care about any other aspect of life, just do that one thing, you get kind of good at it eventually.
Sure.
Or you
Yeah.
you disappear into obscurity. But he was accomplished,
Mhm.
and he was gifted. I'm not taking that away, but he was very focused on that one thing. And
So he was pretty driven, is what seems apparent. Driven to do this form of art through music.
well, you got to realize, Chuck, that like there was no, the idea that he was ever going to become successful was a farce. And even when I suggested, well, I remember one time when I was over one of the very earliest rehearsals he ever had, and Chris was there, and Aaron was there, and I was there, and Kurt, and they got done playing, and he asked me what I thought about him, and I was completely blown away by the music, and was like, this could be on the radio. I could hear this on KGHO. And
Do you
at that,
recall where this took place at?
yeah, it was at that little house on
1,000 and a half.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Shack.
yeah, and that's where he lived with Matt Lukin,
Mhm.
and
Aaron said that he lived there for a while too. Can you verify that?
no, I thought he lived down in some apartments not far from there,
Yeah.
but not there.
Okay.
I don't. There were. I mean, he might have spent the night there or something. But
Sure.
anyway, when I said that about commercial success or mass appeal or something like that, or radio acceptability, it was like I was insulting him. It was like a joke. It was like, you're not being serious. This isn't. That's not. Don't stop it.
Hmm.
And
Was he being humble, or was he thinking that it's not attainable?
so the idea, what later became, the breakthrough, in my mind anyway, to the level that they achieved, had never ever happened before. And I realized that there was kind of music that Kurt was obviously into, and that was the other thing. The only reason I was there was because I was trying to get something out of these musicians. So I was learning. And so we were discussing all these things about music, and particularly about underground and punk rock, and which I knew nothing about. And so I sort of hung on every word that Matt Lukin and Buzz Osborne and Mike Dillard and Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain and Shelley Dilley and all, because they had, some of them it was months or years, and some of it was people had been involved with it for several years, and, like Buzz.
Sure.
But I had come from more mainstream music, more just 70s rock and roll stuff, which I mean, he thought was fine, but not what he thought he wanted. He was mechanically capable of creating, and he wasn't sure that it was what he wanted to do artistically. And mostly, this bit about wanting to become part of the Melvins was absolutely true. And not only because even in like 1985 or 86, Buzz was already an enigma. And the Melvins were already enigma. They were the like high mark from a professional point of view, from an artistic point of view. They were very focused, very, they were getting shows, playing all the time, which, I mean, that's all we wanted, that's all Kurt ever wanted to do, was be what the Melvins were doing. They were far enough out there that no one knew what to make of them, but they got the respect. And no one could, I mean, you didn't really look at the early Melvins and go, wow, that's genius. It is, but the main thing you're not saying is it doesn't suck. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure if it's good, but I know it doesn't suck. And that's all Kurt really wanted to be. But what he was doing, he thought was a lot more bubblegum and wouldn't be respected by Buzz. And so that was sort of who he was. He was the high priest that he was trying to please.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think there was a part of him that when he wrote About a Girl, he was like, Buzz is going to hate this. It wasn't what I thought or what Chris thought. I mean, maybe it's what Chris thought, but it was, secondary to what Buzz was going to think.
Oh, interesting.
And how, even though that was really probably the breakthrough song, and even I sort of rejected it initially because he went through a phase where he was like studying John Fogerty's work with CCR, and I thought, I mean, this is what I saw him do, was he would analyze something and then write a song, which is exactly what he tried to teach me, is when I was trying to learn guitar, he was one of the very first people to sit down and say, show me a guitar lick that you have in one of your songs, and then he would say, that's a song. And it was like 3 notes put together, and I thought it was just like something I could figure out how to do with my fingers, and over and over and over again. I said, no, that's a song. That is a whole song. Oh, now it just has to be arranged. And that was like, really? And so anyway, that's the way that I got along with Kurt. Kurt was very supportive, and so it made me want to hang around him more, and where Buzz was very sarcastic and witty and clever, and I just didn't feel like I could even compete in that, in those speed of those conversations and the snarky comments and all that. I mean, things would, that was an insult, wasn't it?
Did you spend much time at Del Crover's house where they would rehearse? I know that Kurt mentions that he spent hundreds of, rehearsals, watching them.
They rehearsed every single day.
Every day.
And and sometimes probably twice a day. Wow. I mean, that was the other thing, is it was just a place where you could dependably find them. I mean, that was the other thing, is like, there was no money, so it's not like you could drink yourself to death or smoke yourself to death. There was just nothing to do. But once you got a guitar and an amplifier, you could sit in a room for days and days and days, and then you could probably get $5 and put, 10 gallons of gas in a car and drive somewhere and perform in front of somebody, and maybe get another $5 to do it all over again. And in the mid 1980s, that was like, we weren't into sports, we weren't killing it with the ladies, or socially we were the outcasts of the entire harbor. So we hung out together, and Dale Crover's house was a dependable hotspot, because if they weren't there, then they must be playing somewhere in Tacoma or Olympia or up at Guerrilla Gardens in Seattle or wherever.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk timeline. I'd kind of like to go through, if this works for you, in kind of a linear fashion and go back to, if you can recall,